Today I'm talking about one of my favorite morbid curiosities, amusement park accidents. If you'd like to jump right to the clickbait, you can skip to this time here. Otherwise, let's discuss why you clicked on this video in the first place. Carnegie Mellon professor George Lowenstein proposed that curiosity was an innate drive, like hunger, compelling us to gather information. This basic theory helped steer future research, and in 2009, researchers performed a study and found that curiosity activated parts of our brain associated with reward anticipation. And in 2012, found that it also activated regions sensitive to aversive conditions, meaning it triggered an unpleasantness. Only when curiosity was satiated did reward circuits activate, bringing an end to the unpleasantness and giving us those nice catecholamines, which are things like dopamine and norepinephrine. Which brings us back to George Lowenstein's theory. Curiosity, this lack of desired information, is an unpleasant state, and it's this unpleasantness that drives us to learn, to be satiated, like a starving madman frantically searching for a snack. When examining morbid curiosity, a subject with far less research, we need to explain why we're drawn to negative information. If you feel ashamed of clicking on videos like this, don't. It's a completely normal desire. In one of the first big studies on morbid curiosity, they found it to be a pretty common trait. It should be of no surprise that negativity sells. Death and destruction is what makes for good TV, and why the September 11th attacks were shown over and over and over again, despite being a very troubling image. In an admittedly small study from the University of Amsterdam, it was shown that choosing to view negative material resulted in stronger activation of those reward circuits. It's this cost-benefit reward. How much will it cost you to quench your curiosity? There's uncertainty of how gruesome, how negatively impacting something will be in exchange for alleviation of curiosity's unpleasantness. And this uncertainty amplifies the reward, something sensation seekers will know all too well. But before I dive any deeper, let me quell your unpleasantness. So here's my top 10 amusement park accidents, ranked from least to most disturbing. In 2017, as the travel through space was accelerating through one of its many rotations, a seatbelt broke. A teenage girl who was a little too small for the safety bar was ejected from her seat. Before she could be thrown, though, her leg became caught in the equipment, sending her swinging along with the ride until she was catapulted into a metal bar. She was rushed to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Just before 5 p.m., a 13-year-old girl and a handful of amusement park goers boarded the Tower of Power. As the car began to climb, a loud snap sounded. A cable had broken and began to wrap itself in front of the car. The ride operator noticed the noise and some unusual screams, but did not press the emergency stop quite yet. It wasn't until the car completed its first drop that the damage was seen. The cable had wrapped around the 13-year-old girl's lower legs and severed both of them above the ankles. Shame, I used to love freefall rides. On a Wednesday evening, roughly 25 park workers were ordered to ride a test run of the Disco Dancer. After 2 back and forths, the workers claimed they started hearing weird noises coming from the machine. They began screaming to be let off, to stop the ride, but the managers did nothing. A mechanical glitch was increasing the oscillations and the ride was out of control. The passenger compartment flipped off the track, killing 1 and injuring 9. The workers felt the owners knew about the risks, but doomed them anyways. In 2018, a 59-year-old woman was visiting the World Waterpark for her granddaughter's birthday. She decided to ride the Corkscrew, an enclosed water slide. She began her descent with an outstretched hand, but the ring on her 4th digit became stuck in an exposed piece of foam. In a quick instant, her finger had been degloved. The distal phalanx had been severed, and everything past a 1/4 of an inch was torn to the bone. A lifeguard had to search the pool for the missing finger and, of course, the ring. In 2000, 2 girls barely over 10 years old were riding a classic rotor ride, the Cajun Cliffhanger. In rotor rides, a circular room is spun, creating enough centripetal force to keep the passengers stuck to the walls. The floor then descends, only to elevate once the ride is over. Unfortunately for the girls, this time the floor was prematurely elevated, and both got their feet stuck between the rising floor and the wall, proceeding to crush them. Luckily, they walked away with only minor injuries and 2 broken toes. In 2010, a pendulum ride in Barcelona was carrying 4 teenagers. The attraction brings the riders 125 feet into the air and then drops them, accelerating to 62 miles per hour in only 3 seconds. However, the force generated this time would prove too much for the ride's anchor. The large screws securing the base to a slab of concrete broke, and the entire structure collapsed, trapping the 4 teenagers under the toppled ride. 3 survived, but one, a 15-year-old girl, died at the scene. In 2018, another pendulum ride was about to fail and become a viral sensation. The Discovery was carrying 31 passengers who were all enjoying an exciting ride until the main shaft failed. It split in two midway through the ride, crashing to the ground, 2 dead, 29 injured. In 1974, only 9 days after the attraction opened, a young hostess, only 18 years old, was greeting guests as they entered the ride. The attraction featured 6 central stages that stayed fixed while guests in 6 outer theaters revolved counterclockwise around them. The hostess, for unknown reasons, strayed too near to the stage-theater divide and became stuck between one of the fixed walls and revolving walls. She was found crushed to death after a guest heard her screams. In 1986, the Mindbender roller coaster loaded passengers onto one of its 4-car trains and sent them on their way. The ride operators had noticed some odd rattling sounds coming from the train, but after a few successful test runs, they had given it the okay. The train had nearly completed its run before coming to the final loop, when the 4th car's wheels, both front and back, broke off. It began swaying wildly, still being dragged by the front 3 cars. Then, possibly from the damaged equipment, the lap bar released, and all 4 of the car passengers were violently ejected, sending them falling to the concrete below. The runaway train was finally stopped when, unable to complete the final loop, slid backwards and wedged the 4th car into the other side of the loop. Of those that were ejected, 3 died, and the only remaining survivor suffered permanent injuries. In 1978, a pair of newlyweds were looking to take a romantic sky bucket ride over Magic Mountain. It was common mischief to rock the gondolas, to swing them back and forth, adding to the excitement. However, this time, a little mischief would prove fatal. The newlyweds rocked the gondola to such a point that it detached from the cable. The gondola and the 2 lovers inside plunged to the ground. The husband was killed, and the wife sustained serious injuries, possibly losing both legs, but sources on the exact injury I just couldn't find. In 2017, the Fireball, a spinning pendulum ride, suffered a catastrophic failure. Unbeknownst to the operators, corrosion had been weakening the strength of the support beams for years. As the pendulum swung downwards, 2 of the gondolas, each with 4 seats, struck with a support structure. One of the gondolas immediately broke off, sending passengers flying, some ending up 50 feet away. 1 was killed and several others were injured. The history of this iconic Disneyland attraction is especially bloody. In 1967, a 16-year-old boy was riding the People Mover when he decided to have a bit more fun. He got up and attempted to jump between 2 of the cars, and he almost made it, until he slipped and fell onto the track. Oncoming cars quickly trampled him, crushing him to death and dragging him a few hundred feet in a bloody trail. In 1980, history repeated itself. This time, an 18-year-old attempted the car-to-car jump, but suffered the same fate. This one, by far, takes my top spot. It doesn't have the most deaths or any creepy video, but I remember reading about this when it happened and it haunted me for a long time. In 2016, 6 passengers embarked on the River Rapids ride. Amongst the group was 32-year-old Kate, her child, her brother, her brother's partner, and another woman named Cindy and her child. As they were enjoying the raft ride, 1 or 2 of the main water pumps for the attraction failed, causing water levels to sink. As they reached the conveyor belt that would lead to the exit, an empty raft ahead of them was now stuck on the support rails near the conveyor due to the low water level. As they collided with the stuck raft, the still running conveyor belt pushed their raft upward, tilting it vertical and then flipping it over completely. The 2 children were thrown free and were able to escape, but the 4 adults were dropped down into the machinery. The grinding gears took them all. Both children looked on as their mothers were horrifically killed. Cindy's husband and other child were also present, but just in a separate raft. Reports from first responders were haunting. The bodies were so badly disfigured that the 4 park workers and 4 of the first responders sued Dreamworld for the psychological damage. The former safety officer for Dreamworld stated, "In all honesty, if you had the world's leading surgeons in that place at the exact time it happened and with all their equipment, nothing would have changed the outcome." This is horrible. All of this, these violent, disturbing events that happen to us through no fault of our own. And yet I can't stop wanting to know more. Rubbernecking at its most depraved. But it can't just be sensation-seeking, can it? Wanting the thrill of vicariously skirting death from the safety of my room? But what we need to remember is that the human brain is terrible. Not from an evolutionary point of view, but just terrible at trying to be an upbeat, optimistic social media cliché. Psychologist Roy Baumeister proposed that we are built for negative information. We evolved this way because it's proven beneficial to our survival if negative events have a greater psychological impact than positive events. Furthermore, there seems to be less information learned from positive events. They're all very similar. There's not much to learn from two different occasions of a stranger showing you kindness. Conversely, negative events are exceptionally unique and therefore offer unique information. One time I had a beetle fly into my ear. It started biting my eardrum, filling the canal with blood, and all I could do was scream. I think about this frequently, how painful it was, and to this day am extremely protective of my ears. It is this negative information that benefits us, protects us. Morbid curiosity gives us opportunities to confront terrible situations in safety. We can work out solutions or preparations before we have to learn the hard way, like getting your eardrum bit. The same goes for those who love watching horror movies. Most horror buffs think they'd stand a better chance against a monster or killer than others, because they've lived vicariously through a lot of situations. They've thought about ways to handle stuff and mistakes they'd never make. One interesting study collected data showing just that. When looking at how horror fans were dealing with the current pandemic, they found they had significantly lower psychological distress than others. And those with morbid curiosity, they found they experienced significantly greater positive resilience during the pandemic than others. Morbid curiosity doesn't need to be taboo. In fact, to me, it seems to be quite beneficial. So get out there and start looking up some terrible stuff.